Hi everyone. So I will talk. This is a modeling attempt about the resilience and shock propagation on food trade network. And today I will speak about the case of wheat. This was a work done by Jean-Cyrus de Beaupuy, who done this internship this year under the supervision of Philippe, David, and myself. And so this is actually the end of this work that will be hopefully submitted soon. So it's still a bit work in progress. So I'm happy to answer any question and hear your comments about that. So let me just say a few words about the wheat trade network. You probably know more about that than me, but basically it's the key figures are here. I believe it's basically at least 1/10 of the food basket for 6 billion, about 6 billion people in the world, and dispersed over 120 countries. So we can safely say that wheat is really, and wheat products is really a very important part in the food basket for many individuals. And the other key thing is that most of the production, more than half of the world's production, is provided by just 5 countries. So it's already the sign of a very fragile system. Many people rely on very few providers, so that's not a good thing in general. And we know that there are shocks, and of course there is the current Ukrainian war. But we can also expect in the future that extreme weather condition will impact the production, as we saw, and we know that. So the idea is that these shocks can potentially propagate over the world system and have a global impact. So, and this is what I will try to show you today, is that if you cut the export from Ukraine, this will have an impact all over the world, basically. And the point is all to understand the propagation of this shock on this network. And the major difficulty here is that this network, and I will try to show you, give you a few hints about that, this network is extremely complicated. And we know that any process on a complex network is not trivial. So simulation modeling is not that obvious. We know that from experience on many other processes. For example, the well-known example is the stability of an ecosystem. Remove a species from an ecosystem, what will happen? In most cases, it's safe to say that we don't know. And we saw all the mistakes that happened in the last decades. So it's not a trivial thing. Today, I will talk basically about the Ukrainian case, and they are really major exporters in the world. It's for Ukraine, it's almost 4% of the world wheat production. If you take into account the trade, it's 10%, and Russia, of course, is very important. So you can expect that disruption of their export flows will have some consequences in the world. And the question is, can we predict how many people will be impacted? That's really the point. And here, I will take the point of view of a parsimonious, as we say, and robust model. So it's really the physicist idea that you can find some simple model that capture, in some sense, the essence of the phenomenon, and that actually might be more reliable and more robust, in some sense, that very complex simulation with hundreds of parameters. So it's really a very different approach from a very agent-based models or machine learning, where we try to put everything in the model. Here we try to keep the simplest, the most important things, and to make a very simple model. So let me talk about this network then. And in this network, so the data is publicly available from a FAO database. And it's basically about 170 countries in the world. So most of the world with almost 8 billion individuals. And there's something like 6,000 edges between these countries. And so the edges are really what you export from a country I to country J, or what you import, if you look at the other way around. So it's, what can I say, directed, the links, the edges have a direction from a country to another one. They are weighted. The flow can be small or large. And you have, of course, to take this into account. If you forget one of these ingredients, you might miss something very important. So this is the basic structure of this network. And I don't have the time here to discuss all this, but for a directed network, we know that we have different families of nodes. And for example, the web is a famous example of a directed network. But just a long story short, you have in components, so these would be countries that are pure exporters. They export only, they never import. And the opposite are out component. These are countries that are called the out component. And in between, you have, in general, so this is really the general picture valid for any directed network. You have the strongly connected components, which are countries which are connected by a path. So I won't enter all the details, but basically what you observe is that this picture of the components of the wheat trade network is actually, the components are stable. And what does it mean is that the strongly connected components, so the core of the network, is made of about 130 countries. And the average distance between two countries is of order 2 in this strongly connected component. And the out components, so countries that are pure importers, so it's really on the right, corresponds to about 40 countries. So this is, I know it's very quick, but this gives you a global idea of this network. And this is pretty stable from 2010 to 2019. And so that's the general idea. And now, let's go to the point, is that, of course, we would like to compute the percentage of population that are undernourished. So it's called prevalence of undernourishment. And it's really the percentage for each country of people that are under the minimum dietary requirement. Typically, individuals that have less than, let's say, 2,000 kilocalories per day. So this is the typical. It fluctuates from a country to another one, of course. And this is actually provided, this kind of number and requirement is provided by the FAO. And they made another assumption, is that basically the food supply available per habitant is a random variable. It fluctuates from an individual to another one. And if you know the average food supply C dot, let's say, and M is really the threshold, if you're above, you're not undernourished, if you're below, you are undernourished, then you can, with this formula, I'm sorry, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can, in fact, knowing the average quantity of food supply, you can compute the percentage of undernourished people. That's the main message. If you tell me, in this country at this time, that's the average food supply, including wheat, not only wheat, the total food supply, then we know the percentage of population that is undernourished. So that's the main idea. So now this is not related to any shock. It's just knowing the average food supply. We know how many people in this country are undernourished. That's the first point. Then the shock propagation. Sorry for the equation, but I skip most of them. So really the question is, there is a country, and suddenly, so it's somewhere in the network, suddenly the imports decreased. For some reason, if you are directly connected, for example, to Ukraine, if you import from Ukraine, you see your import decreasing from some quantity Q, let's say. So the idea is, how will this propagate to other countries? If this country I is exporting to other countries, the natural thing is that it will decrease the export. That's the main idea, in order to keep the food for your own population. So this is the basic mechanism of propagation. Less import, therefore you reduce the export. That's the simple idea. And there are many discussions about this. There is a recent paper that discussed different mechanisms. And a reasonable mechanism is actually to dispatch this decrease proportionally to different countries. So if you it's just let's say a fair reduction of export depending on the flow. So that's the reasonable assumption. And so you reduce your own all these exports. And what will happen? There are actually two cases. Let's keep this. Let's focus on this one. The main thing is that you reduce your export. Two cases can happen. Either you still have enough food to satisfy the current demand. So you reduce the export, you still have enough wheat to satisfy the demand of your population, then everything is fine, so to speak. Nothing happens, the quantity of available food is the same, and it's this case, the C prime after the shock is the same as before the shock. The other case is when, even by reducing export, the availability of the supply of food is not enough to cover the demand. So you need some food, and this, so you have a parameter less than 1, it's the new supply divided by the demand. It's less than 1, so you don't have enough food. And as we skip the calculation, but what you find is that there are some minimal assumptions here, but what you find is that the supply of food available after the shock is the previous one times a factor that is less than 1. And the important thing is that it depends, of course, of this quantity X, which is the new supply divided by the demand. And also, of course, this quantity of W, which is the share of wheat in your food basket. And that's a very important quantity, is that some countries rely a lot on wheat, some other countries not. And we'll see that, that this is a fundamental thing. Let's say for North African countries, for example, most of the food basket relies on wheat. And of course, a variation of the import can have a big impact. Other countries are less sensitive, let's say, to wheat import variation. So what the main idea, I think I wrote a recap slide, yes. So the main idea of this simple model is then this one. You have a shock. So here, what we'll see today is the reduction of Ukrainian export of wheat. And you will propagate the shock recursively. So with the mechanism I told you about, just a proportional reduction to the less import means less export. And for each country, then you have a new amount of total food available. And from this total amount of food available after the shock, you are able to compute the proportion of what is called the prevalence of undernourishment, so the fraction of people that are below the minimum threshold. So that's the main idea. So in principle, it's simple. Yes?
Just a quick question on the proportional strategy. It means that if the inputs are reduced by X, you reduce the export by X. You
yes.
do not modulate to optimize to have C dot, C prime dot as close as C dot.
Exactly. You just when it's possible.
All right.
When it's possible, the sum over all the outgoing flows is X, as you say. But it's not the same. But basically, what we did is that we tried different strategies. This is the proportional one, but you could try the uniform one, etc. Results are similar. So it doesn't seem to be a super important thing. There are other things that there are assumptions. We assume that the local production is constant, things like that. So you have to assume something about stocks and production, of course, local things. But all things being equal, we do exactly what you said. And so that's the plan, actually. So then you have just to generate, and so this model runs on a little computer. That's not a big deal. And recursively, you propagate the shock, and when it's done, then you can compute the new prevalence of undernourishment in each country and look at the difference. How many additional people fall below the undernourishment threshold. And so I will try to illustrate this model on the Ukrainian case. And we started, but I discussed this later, with a 50% cut of Ukrainian export. So let's see what happens. And in fact, only, I would like to say, only Ukrainian export, a cut of 50%, has a huge effect on the network. Already this. It's in fact, it's almost 4% of the total amount of wheat that reached the world market, the global market, and it changes a lot the network. So it's interesting to see that one country, an important one, of course, but you divide the export by 2, which is not a negligible number, of course, but it has a huge effect on the network. And let me skip some details. And let me show you some examples, because what you see is, in fact, there are some typical cases, let's say. So that's for example, for Yemen, if you want to understand all the wheat that arrives in Yemen, so 100% of the import to Yemen, you have to take all the subgraph, and you see the exporter in green here. So Yemen gets some wheat from USA, Canada, other countries. And this is, so it's quite unreadable, but you can understand more or less the complexity of the network. Now you can prune this network a little bit. So you can remove less important links. And for example, on the B here, it's still the subgraph of the supply chain for Yemen, but that contains almost 92% of all imports. So now it's much more readable. And what you see here is that in the case of Yemen, actually the wheat is going from Russia, Ukraine to Egypt and Turkey, and then Yemen, and sometimes directly from Australia and Ukraine to Yemen. And that's a typical illustration of one class of countries that we saw, is that Yemen, in this case, receives wheat directly from Ukraine, but also from intermediaries, such as Turkey or Egypt. Some other countries, for example, Egypt doesn't deal with intermediaries. They receive directly the wheat from here, Russia, USA, Ukraine, France, Europe. That's a very simple case. And in contrast, some other countries, such as Libya, they receive the wheat only from intermediaries. So you have only direct flows or only indirect flows. That would be Libya, and Yemen is a mixture of both. And so here you see that so there are some trivial cases. Of course, if you reduce the export from Ukraine, this will have a direct effect on Egypt. It is not difficult to compute, but you can have second order effect, typically in countries such as Yemen or Libya, where you have a cascade of shocks that can result in the end of a loss in importation. So this is just to illustrate the 3 different types of countries. And when you do the simulation, this is what you obtain for a few countries. So here it's the on the x-axis is the average number of calories per day per capita. So a typical number is 2,000. Well, if you are on a diet in European countries, it's more 1,500, but okay, 2,000 is considered as a reasonable number. And you see here in orange, this is the loss due to the shock. So in some cases in Yemen here, the loss is of about 6%, Lebanon 10%, and blue, this is what remains after the shock. So in fact, it doesn't seem too much like that. But now, if you look at the in terms of how many people it represents, so what does that mean? These numbers, how many people, thousands of people or millions of people that go below the undernourishment threshold, and here is the what it means in terms of numbers. And for Yemen, here we divided in 2 parts. So the orange are the Ukraine direct cuts. The blue one is the share due to indirect cuts, so this intermediary effect. And you see that in total, it represents 4% of the population that goes below the nourishment threshold. It means that for Yemen here, here's the number in million, it's almost 1.2 million inhabitants that fall below the minimum calorie, let's say, threshold. And you can see this for the different countries. And the total, basically, how many people will be affected in the world is about 5 million people that will fall below their own local threshold, undernourishment threshold. Of course, you can vary. So this is a little test that we did. This is the export cut from Ukraine. So 50% we were here. But of course, you can vary that. And you see that the additional number of people that are here, there's no mitigation strategy. Of course, it's just the first, it's what will happen if you cut. Then, of course, countries will react, etc., and try to find some food somewhere else. But at first answer, let's say, if you cut between 20% and 100% of the Ukraine production, the additional number of people going below the nourishment threshold is going from 1 to almost 10 million people. And so this is the result of the simulation, which, by the way, is not specific to wheat. Actually, you see that the main ingredient is really the structure of the network and the propagation mechanism. So it's actually very, very simple and easy to improve. I mean. So now let me conclude this. So this is what I told you before, is that we can expect that only for Ukraine, so we didn't take into account something like Russia cutting the export for some reason. For some reason, Putin could decide to stop some export to some countries. That would be even worse than the figures. But about 5 million people will be affected by this cut in our simulation. And I didn't have the time to detail everything, but for most affected countries, the indirect effects are the most important. So it's because Ukraine is supplying another country in wheat, and this country is then supplying your country. And these indirect paths are the most important reason here for supply problems. And basically, we can identify 3 different groups of countries, and in particular 2 groups of countries that are in danger. And there are basically 2 parameters that comes out from that, is your dependence on wheat. So again, it's this parameter FW. It's how much your food basket depends on wheat. And then the total food supply. Do you have a lot of food in general or not? So some countries, they don't rely not too much on wheat, but they have in general a low food supply. And this is the first group of countries that are in danger, because even a small variation in the wheat supply will affect the whole food basket. And typical countries are here sub-Saharan African countries, also South and Central America, and they are in danger, which means that really any variation, small variation of the wheat supply can induce a large number of undernourished individuals. Then, of course, I would like to say, you have countries that rely a lot on wheat. So they have a large share of wheat product and wheat in their food basket, and the medium, let's say, food supply, and they are typically in danger. So, and these countries are typically North African countries, but you find also Eastern countries, Eastern Europe countries in this group. And then, just a quick word, the countries that rely moderately on wheat and have a large food supply are out of danger, basically. So this is typically Western Europe and North America. So this was just to show you a very simple, let's say, a model with some very basic mechanisms that we can discuss, and you agree or not, but at least they're very simple and transparent, and allows us to understand the shock propagation of this network. And that's really the main point. All these shock propagates over the network. We have the data, so the network is known. So really the idea is how to simulate that. And so let's finish here. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks for this presentation. I'm a bit surprised not to see the wheat producer in your group of countries, because those should be out of danger. And the second question is, for mitigation strategy, should it be better to multiply the links or to simplify the network?
So I guess the producer, again, the list here is not exhaustive. Of course, if you mean here Russia or but some countries actually can produce a lot of wheat but have a low food supply in general, so they are not completely out of danger. But in general, I didn't give you the exhaustive list here, so I have to check. But now for mitigation. Mitigation strategy is relatively clear. You have to, you have to ever lower your FW, your dependence on wheat. So you have to change the food basket. Or you have to increase the total amount of food available. I don't say it's easy, but just from a...
But you can't play on the network itself.
But this will have an effect on the network. The network is just an import-export network. So it's just a country, or how much will I import? So that can be tuned by the country itself. The country can decide, okay, let's cut wheat imports. We don't need that anymore. But you cannot do that from outside. So
you can do whatever you want because you are a modeler.
So. You mean from trying. What the resilience? Well, I would say that. Well, very naively, I would say that the danger here is typically that there are very few large producers. So this induces a large fragility in the system, of course. So a reasonable thing to do would be to increase the diversity of your imports. So that would change your network. Instead of having a big flow from Russia and Ukraine, let's say, let's diversify. That of course would significantly lower the resilience, the fragility of the system. That's a very common sense answer. We didn't test it. We didn't test mitigation strategy. Actually, we could try that. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you use this model to understand what happened, for example, in 2007, 2008, and to understand what may be missing from the model to understand how a country reacts when there is a crisis?
So well, we didn't include the reaction of countries here. So it's really the first step. It's the first wave. Okay, if you do nothing, what will happen? So that's now there are certainly many applications. I don't know what the paper you're talking about, but certainly this is possible. I mean, of course, many, here, I mean, there are many things that need to be done. First, we didn't speak about price. So all economic, regulation and reaction, etc. This comes after, of course. When there is a food crisis, of course, the prices are changing, etc. So here, really, the idea is really the first wave is really just to assess, the impact. Of course, this will have a certain number of consequences: reaction of different countries, economic crisis, change of prices, etc. This is not in the model. It's really just the step zero, let's say, just the impact. So actually, with this model, so far, what we did, I cannot answer a more complicated question.
And what are the next steps that you envision for this one?
Well, this can be, I mean, introducing some economics and, you know, and introducing some prices consideration, why not? That could be, you know, something. Testing indeed some mitigation strategies, what could be done from countries, this sort of things. Yes, yes. This study is synchronized with the end of the internship of Jean Cyrus. So far we're at the end of a cycle. So next step we'll see. But I was surprised in some sense to I know well the literature on networks. I know less the literature on let's say on food trade networks. But I was surprised that there are very few models in the spirit of what we did for networks. The literature is very scarce in this respect.
I have a follow-up comment on that. Your network you use quite a lot to the trophic network developed by ecologists, and the ecologists are very creative in inventing indexes. And did you look at a bit this literature to find ways to explore your results?
Actually, the easy part is to characterize the network. So, and indeed, the ecologists and other people characterize that there are dozens of indices that characterize the structure of the network, etc. So that's actually, I went very quickly through the characterization, but you can make, you know, hundreds of measures of the network. But the difficult part is really the dynamics. And in fact, an ecosystem too. An ecosystem, it's even more, you know, the prey and predator are connected by some let's say differential equation to make it simple. So you have this huge system of coupled differential equation, and actually nobody knows how to solve them. And this is actually the cause of many problems, is that when you put away some species, you don't really know what will happen after that. And here, in some respect, it's the same problem. We have a dynamics on top of this network, and what will it give when you apply a shock? And that's really the main problem. That's really the main problem. And I was surprised that it wasn't in other cases, but there are very few papers actually on this. Well, of course, I'm happy if you know some reference, I'm happy to. Please send them to me.
Last question, please.
Just, I don't know if you know the literature on the gravity models in trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this, I think it's a simplification of your system because it's more bilateral interaction between two to explain this.
Yeah, actually the gravity model would be useful if we didn't have the data. Here, the nice thing is that we know all the network, we know all the export import. The gravity model takes some, you know, from a country I and country J. What's the quantity of import or export between these two countries if you don't know only the distance or whatever. Here, the nice thing is that we know perfectly the network. We have the time every year, the FAO database gave us the import, export, and much more. So, and the production. So, I mean, we basically know this network very well. So, the main problem here is not to model these import, export. That indeed we could use some sort of this type of model. It's really again the dynamics. You change something somewhere, or will it propagate to all the network, and what will be the consequences? So this is what we try to explore here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.